All right. Thank you very much, Ala. So I presume with that cue, we are ready to go. Um, Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. Let me just begin by almost acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are located at the moment and operating from. Um, the other thing that I would like to acknowledge is the contribution of Ala and her team for putting this important webinar together, which I hope will lead to some uh, products that will find its way eventually to other fora. Allah has been supported by a very powerful team of people, including Saini, Sala, Pranesh, and Ethel, and Joshua from the Center for Flexible Learning. And I would like to acknowledge the contributions of that team and the Center for Flexible Learning in orchestrating this webinar. So before I go, let me add my welcome to everyone. Talofa, Maloilele, Kiorana, Ikuwe, Maori, Halo, Oleketa, and Fakalofa Atu. Bula everyone to this webinar. My name is Som Naidu. I'm currently the Pro Vice Chancellor of Flexible Learning and the Director of the Center for Flexible Learning. And I will be supported in this webinar also by Katerina from the Institute of Education, will be fielding any questions that you might have through the Q&A tab that Ala has mentioned. Just let me say a few things about how we are going to orchestrate this session. I will provide a very brief introduction on what this is all about. And then there'll be a few questions that I'll pose. They are not binding. We can deal with any question from anyone. And so I would encourage you to let those questions come through the Q&A or any other fora, and we will deal with them as we go through the session. But the questions will only be serving as a framework and not necessarily a sort of thing that will be we are going to be confined to. So we can have a wide-ranging conversation, as we say. It's a talanoa, so let's let it be a talanoa, and we'll see how it goes. We have 1.5 hours, so we've got plenty of time. Sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself. What we have tried to do here is put together a very powerful team. We have given this quite a bit of thought, because what we wanted to do was to bring together some key thinkers, from key perspectives from around the university to start a conversation, because we were frustrated that amongst the very many things that are happening at the university, and this is not typical of USP, this is also true of other places around the world, that there isn't enough conversation taking place around teaching and learning. So we wanted to bring together some key people, and by that you will see by the names on this web on this panel, you will see why they are here. So in order for them to provide their input to a conversation that can be started and taken to other places. Now, instead of me talking a lot about them, I thought it might be a good idea to just go to the panelists and ask and give them 1 minute. I mean, I'm going to give you 1 minute to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the university, so that the 30 or so people who have so far registered in the webinar have a better idea of who you are. I could do this myself, but I would much rather you do it, so that you get a chance to say something and warm up a little bit. So can I start with Seula, please?
Malo Elele, and thank you, Som, for leading us into this. As you know, my name is Seula. I'm Tongan, And I'm very fortunate to be living in Tonga and work for a regional organization. I have been with USP for 16 years. And in all that time, I've been with the Institute of Education, and it's been a real privilege to serve these 12 countries. And I'm very proud to say that I have been working across 11 of those 12 countries. And thank you for this opportunity. Malo?
Malo Sheila, thank you. Debbie?
Kia ora from the Cook Islands. I'm the campus director here based in Rarotonga, the main island of the Cooks. And I've had 18 years working in education here in the Cook Islands, 35 years working in education. That is my passion. And I think from the point of thinking about recalibrating and rethinking online and flexible learning, is really important from the regional campus perspective, I think, when we're away from the main campus. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you, Som, for initiating it. And I'm very humbled to be on this panel with so many interesting and highly qualified people.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks. Nada, how about you?
Okay, can you hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. So?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. So I'm Nada. I'm with the School of Accounting and Finance. I won't say how many years I've been here because it's a bit scary. But at the same time, I think reflecting on those years, I've seen a lot of change, and a lot of change for good, change for better. And one of the things I've had the opportunity to work on is conversion of courses to online mode. And while we've had pushback on that, differences of opinion, I think it's certainly been a move in the right direction. And it's given an opportunity to our academic staff to really upskill in that area and to really become, I would say, experts in designing online courses. So also in my role as an associate dean, working with external reviews and international accreditation, the questions that we're increasingly asked are around, how do we support our students, for example? So when it comes to flexible learning and just students, at regional campuses, the questions about how we support them, the questions about equity, and that includes things like access as well as assessment. So very interested to be a part of this panel today, and thank you to CFL and to SOM for this wonderful opportunity.
Oh, beautiful, Nada. Thank you very much. Edwin, my friend, let's go.
Hi, everyone. If you can hear me okay. I'm Edwin. Most people just call me Eddie. I work here out of IT services. I've been here for quite some time. But basically, my role is to ensure that whatever the members before you decide on the pathway forward for online activities, we try to ensure that we deliver those solutions accordingly. And it's also been nice to see that journey take place for the university, where, as Nada rightfully put it, we went from being completely one-on-one faces, and as you can see, this is one of the tools that we put out that can now bring people together irrespective of where we are. And I think that's a good opportunity for us to discuss that on this forum. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eddie, and every one of you. If I can add a little bit of background about myself, although you will know a lot of it, I too started a long time ago at this university. Of course, I was a student, like most of the people at that time. This was the only place you could go to for higher education. I joined as a staff member around the 1980s and was one of the first instructional designers, along with Eileen Tui and Ruby Varar at that time. Many of you will know. We were the three musketeers, as we were then called, leading the charge on print-based course design and development in those days. Then I ran away for a long time and didn't come back, and only came back about a few years ago. So I too have a very nostalgia. There's a sense of nostalgia and association with this place. that is very hard to get rid of, and not that I want to. So it's a privilege. And what I thought we would do today is have a bit of a discussion around what the future lies. And obviously, in all of that, COVID plays a very significant role. I mean, God, COVID has really changed the face of everything that we do, not only just our work in learning and teaching. Not long ago, I wrote a little bit of an editorial where I sort of used the metaphor or the classic words from Charles Dickens, which went along the lines of "It's the worst of times and the best of times." I mean, worst, of course, you'll understand this, but why I say the best of times, because COVID in some ways has really focused our attention on how we are carrying our operations. And for 50 years, which is why I introduced myself the way I did, we've been arguing for flexibility, we've been arguing for openness, and we've been arguing for the use of technology for teaching and learning in a context that we are placed in, which is so diverse, so huge, so large, and so disparate, um, that non-traditional approaches, and by the term non-traditional I mean other than face-to-face teaching, which is why I'm looking forward to uh, the views of the panelists on this panel and their contribution um, uh, to teaching and learning. Oh, did I mention Lepani? I'm sorry, Lepani. How did I forget that? How did I forget that? Was it not? My apologies. And I'm just going to stop there and come back. I'm sorry about that, Lepani. Can you please introduce yourself? How did I forget that? It's not on the list, probably. Lepani, no, you are on the list. My apologies.
Yes, the current president of the USP Ludala, and I'm very proud to be part of this webinar meeting. And I'm still a undergrad student, but I'm honored and I'm blessed to be part of this meeting with those people who have those qualifications, doctors and professors. And I'm blessed to be part of this meeting. And my role here at Ludala is to hear the grievances from students and to raise it up to relevant authorities. And I'm proud that this meeting will also, for the situation that we are going in right now, to COVID and the flexible learning. And I'm honored to be part of this meeting to deliver some of the challenges that are facing, that the students are facing right now. Thank you so much.
Naka Lepani, my apologies again. So I was saying, I think the COVID-19 has presented us, amongst the challenges, many opportunities, um, and that's what we're here to talk about. So while the future might look bright for non-traditional approaches to learning and teaching, like I was saying, the questions then remain: what are we doing about taking advantage of those opportunities? How should universities of the future rethink and recalibrate? And you will hear a lot about those words: rethinking how we teach and learn, uh, uh, and how we recalibrate our operations, our teaching and learning operations or choreographies, as I was saying. So the first question that I thought I would pose to you is that, how, during the first few months of COVID crisis, not just USP, but many other organizations around the world had to take their operations, learning and teaching operations, online. But you and I will know around this table that, for decades, we've been arguing for more flexibility, for more openness, for greater use of technology, for non-traditional approaches to learning and teaching. My question to the panel then is this: what is the nature of that conversation? Now, what are you, having been through that 3 or 4 months of non-traditional approaches to learning and teaching, the flexible approaches to learning and teaching, what are the unanswered questions for you in relation to online and flexible learning? What are the things that you like to see more attention paid to? Right at the top of the bed. So can I just put that question out to anyone to respond?
Thank you, Sam. I'll jump in here while the rest of my colleagues think up their fantastic and more brilliant answer. So I'm willing to go before. So whatever is left to be said intelligently, I'll leave it to my colleagues. I think some of my unanswered questions and my perspective will be a bit different because I'm not a lecturer, and the Institute of Education deals mainly with national education systems and in the development space. So my answer may come across somewhat different perspective, but collectively they are the perspectives of a university that we do a variety of things. So I think for me, there are still some unanswered questions, and one in particular is about pedagogy. Pacific pedagogy. What does that mean? What does Pacific pedagogy mean? What is Pacific these days? I mean, maybe 20 years ago we had a clear idea in our head on what is Pacific, but the world has changed so much. Our diaspora communities, our moving around and migration has also challenged some of the ways we think about Pacific. So I'm still trying, and here at the university, at the Institute, we're still trying to define what is a relevant pedagogy to our Pacific students and from a diversity of group of students. We have multiple languages, multiple ways of thinking across this university. We're so diverse, and what is a relevant pedagogy? So before we get to the technology, is the how and the relationship between a teacher and a learner, and that's all surrounding that first issue. The second issue comes back to a long-standing issue of equity. Equity and access to educational service, that we try and bridge the gaps between rural communities, isolated islands, urban centers like Suva, because of our diversity. So the issue of equity is still a challenge that we need to figure out. How do we lessen that gap between girls and boys, between young, between older learners and recent learners? So those are just two key issues that I hope that we can continue to explore. Malo.
Naka, thank you very much, Shola. I think there's plenty to unpack there, but I'm going to let somebody else respond before I do try to do that. Nada, I see you nodding a little bit there.
I was going to let Debbie go first, but since you've given me the mic, I will take the mic. Thank you. I'll just put two things on the table briefly that I noted. One is in relation to assessment, and particularly around the idea of a final exam, because the idea of a final exam is very much linked to our traditional approach to education. I mean, of course, there's a final exam. There has to be a final exam. So I think one of the questions is, do we need to have a final exam in every course? I mean, that's one question that we have the opportunity to ask. And certainly some course coordinators have come forward and made the case that, in their course, they don't feel there's a need to have a final exam. They have some other forms of assessment which they believe are more appropriate for their course. So I think an opportunity to rethink, do we need a final exam in every course? And where the answer is yes, we do, perhaps because of professional accreditation, let's say, then rethinking what does that look like in today's world. So I know some that you've been looking at options for proctoring, online proctoring of exams. And I hear from our professional colleagues in CP Australia, that's something that they're doing, but they're also trying to get their head around how that works in the current scenario that we have, where not everybody can get to the designated online exam sites. So the
Mhm.
point is about assessment, rethinking assessment. The other point is in linking into what Siula mentioned around equity. It's equitable access to technology for students. And what I mean about that is where we're asking students to come up with a video, for example, a group video, and this is in a regional context, and they can do that, but they might need some additional support. Now, that could be in terms of the venue that they can use, like a studio, or it could be just access to online apps, for example, that will help them with compiling and constructing their own videos. So I hope I'm making the point clearly. What additional support do students need in terms of the technology to help them cope with courses in this environment that we have? Thank you.
Knocking on that. Debbie, you were next.
Straight away, different people's ideas are triggering different thoughts, of course. So the question of what is the Pacific and how we can use our recalibrated and reimagined thinking in terms of how we offer our courses to the diaspora, I think is a really exciting space to start thinking about for our, large ocean states where our people are all over the world, and USP, and those people are looking for learning around themselves as Pacifica people that they don't necessarily see in some of the other contexts that they find themselves in. So I think there's a possibility there. In terms of thinking about exams, I definitely am one that is not necessarily in favour of the exam as the right assessment for every single thing. And in the region, we have real difficulty for particularly our outer islands students to be able to, they can take a video on their phone. Most of our students, when COVID happened, we did an assessment and we only had one student who didn't have a device of some kind to be able to access their courses. But of course you can't write an essay on a phone, or there's those complications, but they certainly wouldn't have the bandwidth or the facility in the outer islands to be able to do some of those assessments that require some of those other apps and things like that. So there's quite a bit of anxiety around while we have those supports in place, and we have now the cable coming to the Cook Islands that gives us fibre optic cable, and that's made a big difference, doesn't necessarily translate out into the outer islands. So there's some of those complications. One of the things I think is that we have to remember as we rethink and recalibrate is that we never neglect the people, that the people are the focus, and the need to contextualize. And so, what's designed in Fiji is not necessarily contextually appropriate to other Pacific nations, and then we need to be mindful of those things when we are rethinking and reimagining how we might offer our courses in whatever state that might be, whether it's self-paced or whether it's micro-credentials or whatever that looks like. We need to make sure that they are contextualized for our students so that they actually meet their needs. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. My God, I mean, in a short while, we have uncovered so many challenges here that it's almost mind-boggling. I mean, how do you actually get all of this together and orchestrate all of this together? This is the important part, isn't it? The issues around assessment, issues around pedagogy, let alone Pacific pedagogy. First of all, we need to articulate that and identify, and it really raises tough question for people like Eddie. And I wanted to bring Eddie here and say, Eddie, wait till the whole conversation is over. But there's enough here for you to say how do you deal with this? What would you like to have if you had the opportunity to go to the vice chancellor and say, I need X, Y, and Z in order to be able to assist people like Debbie, like like Siola and like Nadar, the sorts of things that they're talking about. What do you need?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges whenever it comes to online delivery, obviously, is bandwidth in our islands. And that's something that we've worked hard on in the last couple of years. We're lucky that we've just been approved to upgrade our satellite platform in August this year, by the way, which is where and also connect a few of our islands up to fiber. Solomon Islands being one of them. As you can imagine, Dr. Debbie, you're coming in from the Cook Islands. You had the fiber on the island, which is fortunate. But see, all this sort of delivery comes with its technical challenges. For us to be able to deliver whatever is needed for the community and for remote learning, it's easy. If you tell us this is what we need to do, we can basically put something before you. The two biggest challenges that we face from a technical perspective is number one, adoption. Adoption by people to say, yes, I'm willing to use this technology to take my courses online. I'm willing to learn the etiquette required to facilitate this, and that requires us to train people, get them prepared. Whilst we can put out manuals and stuff like that, sometimes the small etiquettes matter. Like, what do I do when I first go in? Do I test my audio settings? Do I test my microphone? It can be as simple as that to the more complicated things like, what sort of room do I need to sit in? What are the aesthetics that I need to make sure are in place? But delivery, we found, is we have to work very closely with academics on this. And also, I feel for the students. If they're within one of our campuses, they're lucky enough to join our session. But I'd like to see the time when a student doesn't have to come to a campus to actually do what they need to do. I want them to do it from home. Debbie's coming in from the Cook Islands. Why can't she teach a course that's offered here in Lodala from the Cook Islands? Why does she have to come into Fiji? Dr. Cyril is the same. And then that's where the opportunities come up is we're still working on a model where teaching has to be done by people in country. Consider for a moment if I want a specialist in a specialized field in engineering or IT to teach it from Australia or America, but just come onto our time zone and just come in remotely. I mean, that's a thought as a special guest lecture. I would have loved that if I had that opportunity when I was a CSIS student. So these are some of the areas. In terms of proctored exams, a lot of people are already doing proctored exams for certain courses, but we've got to get the platforms into place. And unfortunately, when you look at the whole barrage of things, it just comes down to essentially investment and negotiations with the various companies to make the technology work for us. So that's how I see it. Thanks.
Thanks, Eddie. Plenty there for us to bite into, to chew. I want to go to Lapani. Lapani, do you like what you hear, or is there something we're missing? What are we missing?
Yes, I'm with all the panelists that have just discussed what their view and the challenge that they've just mentioned. I think those are all things that the students are facing right now here at Lodala, and especially for the resources and the materials. And that is something that main challenges of students right now. And for the flexible learning that we are in right now, it's for Lodal, it's already been there, and for USP, it's already been there. It's already in place. But I think the only thing that we need to do is to revise the flexible learning and the technology, because for now we can't go back. We have to go forward, because we can't just go back. And something that gives students is that independent. They have to be on themselves, and they have to be on their own. And that's something that we need to do, is just to revise. And like what Dr. Rika has mentioned in terms of assessment and final exam. These are something that the students are facing right now in like take home exam, but and also that online exam. These are some of things that the students are facing right now. But I think I believe that we need to revise our the system that we are going around in terms of technological change.
Like, okay, you're saying that I can hear, and I hear that most people are saying, all right, we've moved on, and we are not going back. Okay, that's quite clear. We're not going back. So what is that future going to look like? There's some really powerful concepts that have been articulated here. I mean, we've been dealing with access and equity for a very long time, and this was embedded in our strategic plans right from the way from get-go, from the Morris report, and we've been trying to do that with printed materials and those sorts of things, so we are addressing those things as best as we can. But I think the point that Eddie mentions is very important too. New technologies are coming. And of course, both Sola and Debbie have mentioned the challenges of those technologies. Not everybody has got the connectivity. And that is the way it's going to be. So that is the lay of the land. Okay, so those are the challenges I think we have mentioned. What I would like to see is some thoughts coming out from this panel about how can we put all of this together given the challenges, because the challenges are always going to be there. Bandwidth is always going to be a problem. It's never going to be enough, and connectivity is always going to be a problem. I hear people saying that Pacific Islanders are more conversational in nature. They like to come to a place. And even though Eddie says, we can have a very distributed setting, a teacher could be anywhere in the world, and learners could be anywhere in the world. But Lapani, let me ask you the hard question. Is it what students really want? Do the students want to camp on campus, or they don't care? Or they would rather be somewhere else? I'll ask you this question. I'll tell you this because there's a lot of stuff coming out of everywhere in social media. People are saying that schools, not necessarily tertiary education systems, serve other functions as well. It's not just about learning the subject matter. There's many other things that happen in a situation where students come in, so that children can come to school, so that parents can go to work. It's a lot more complicated thing like that. I mean, if a child stays home to study, then somebody's got to make sure that the resources are there, and enough resources are there for 3 or 4 kids to share, and also somebody's there to supervise and provide lunch and those kinds of things. You can't leave your children home and then walk away and go to a job. So there's educational organizations serve other purposes as well. So I wanted to come back to you, Lapani, and you may not have data, but I'm sure as a student, as a contemporary student, you'll have experience. What are your student colleagues wanting? I mean, wanting is one thing, whether they'll get that is another thing. But what kind of an educational experience do you think that they will cherish?
Yes, as I've already mentioned, that flexible learning is already there, and as like in the during the first semester, in the mid semester, that's when the COVID-19 outbreak came in. So when this came in, and the only challenge the students that they are facing is that the change of mode from because most of them they are paying their fees for face-to-face mode, and when it comes to when they heard and when they know that they are on online mode, and this is something that triggered them, and but it's already there. The only thing that triggered them is that from like they don't know what is going to happen, and the thing is as Pacific Islanders, we believe in the age-old tradition. Like we have to be in a classroom, we have to be in a face-to-face with our teacher and our lecturers. And for now, the students they are blend with the flexible learning right now, and with the change that we are having right now. And I believe it's just the from semester 1 until the end of semester 1, and coming right now most students are preferring flexible learning or online learning for now. And that's the feedback from most students right now, that they are with the online mode that we are going in right now.
So can I come now? I can come to you as a practicing teacher on the cold front, so to speak. What needs to change, Nada? What needs to change institutionally to sort of rethink, as Debbie says, and reorient our operations. I'm talking about some practical steps. What would you do as a dean, and what would you recommend, or head of school?
Okay, okay. Big questions, Son. I just wanted to link what Eddie said a while ago with what Lepan is talking about, and this idea of the campus or the university as a community. So, there are other things apart from just the classroom learning. And I just wanted to bring the idea of the the outreach commons, the outreach commons. I wanted to bring that into the discussion because I see a lot of opportunities with those centers. We have the 2 in Fiji at the moment and possibly a 3rd and 4th early next year. So I think the initial idea of the outreach commons was a place where students could come and access material, for example, through Moodle, somewhere closer to home. So it's reducing the distance, it's reducing the cost that are involved in accessing those resources. But I'm thinking about that more broadly now and thinking, one, are those potentially venues for proctored exams? But secondly, are those potentially places where students could come and have discussions, so small group discussions? So it's not, taking the focus off just somebody coming and sitting in front of the computer or accessing Wi-Fi, but what else can be done in that space? How can we get more value out of that space? So that's my response to the comments by Eddie and Lepani. But I think also somebody mentioned, maybe it was Eddie earlier, or maybe it was Debbie, like, why do we need to have somebody in Fiji or in the Cook Islands or in Vanuatu, for that matter, delivering the course? Can we think beyond that to somebody in the US or somebody in Australia who is an expert in the area, either delivering the whole course or delivering a significant portion of the course? So I think that is where USP, we need to think about our policies. Is that something that USP allows? Do we allow, will we allow somebody from Australia who's an expert in law maybe, or in history, to actually deliver the course? Like, why is that? Why would we not allow that? If it makes sense, if we've got the technology, and if that's the best person to deliver the course, why would we not have a policy that allows that? Those are my interventions for now.
Yeah. And 2 points there I just want to pick up on. You talked about this outreach commons. The outreach commons in one sense is no different from, well, in the same vein, not really different from a campus or a center, isn't it? It's much smaller. But if you were thinking about what could be done at an outreach commons, well, only a couple of those, the same things Debbie would say, why can't I do those sorts of things? This is what the campus is set up for. This is what the center is set up for a place where people can come and access resources. But your second point is actually the point that I wanted to get to from a school's point of view. How in 2021, when you have your orientation programs or when you have your consultations with your academic staff, what is going to change about your modus operandi in terms of learning and teaching? And I want to bring in a very important point here. What do you think senior management, and I'm not talking about SMT, I'm talking about heads of schools and deputy heads of schools, or in the former iteration, the deans, what would they be taught? And you mentioned policies. This is a very important point. What policies need to change and how should it change? Because unless you change our learning and teaching policies to reflect the kinds of things that we are talking about now, that Eddie is talking about, we're not making any progress, isn't it?
Can I speak to that?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think there's a couple of ways that we've been experimenting with ideas around these very things in the cooks, and one of them has been using social media, and off our USP Cook Islands Facebook page, creating private groups for the courses, so ED 115 or ED 100, whatever, and the students are members of that group. And so those are students who are in the very remote islands access the tutorial via the live stream when the tutor is teaching here in Rarotonga, and comments and interacts with the students. The other students have also found it really useful in terms of being able to go back and re-look at the live stream video after class when they're needing to do their assessments and things like that. So in regards to policy, I think there are some policies, like if we had access to social media or YouTube and those sorts of things within Moodle, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Edwin, but that there's some policy around not being able to use those, and yet lecturers constantly put a YouTube clip into their Moodle things, and then the students aren't allowed to access them via their USP net kind of stuff. So those policies need to change. YouTube is now, you know, an excellent library. If I need to learn how to do anything, I pop onto YouTube and it teaches me in 5 seconds. Of course, I need to be a critical thinker about those things. So I think that's one thing. We've had students, you know, who are 4 hours flying time away from us access those tutorials because of going live stream. And so it's just an experiment, and we're trialing that. We're also trialing setting up a USB hub in the outer islands where we can provide some PCs, printer, internet capacity for students in those outer islands, and trying to find you know, a sort of a learning broker or somebody that can support by tutoring across multiple, like scaffolding the courses for students. And so we're experimenting, we're thinking outside the square and trying to come up with those ideas. I think even though we've got the Awaroa cable here and we have fibre optic cable, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Edwin, but USP still, you know, no matter what the policy is or how good our, you know, I'm negotiating for a dedicated line only for USP off that cable at the moment. But I think the way it's structured via IT is that we will still have our speed slowed down because of having to go all the way through, you know, with USP net and coming back to the cooks. And so some of those things around infrastructure would really be useful to think outside the square. I know we need strong securities, but you know, that lowering of the speed for the regional campuses really impacts on whether we can truly be creative and reimagine the way we facilitate courses. I think COVID has shown us clearly that it is possible. Suddenly, regional students were allowed to do any course in the region, which we've never been allowed to do before. And that has to stay in place. That policy needs to change. If a course is available in a face-to-face capacity, it needs to be offered in the region if we are to be equitable for all of our students across the region. That's me.
Debbie, you highlighted a very important point here, which is about, and I always knew that there's a lot of good work that has gone on and is going on, and I think what we need, alongside policy redesign and redevelopment, and I'm trying to emphasize that so that there's some take-home messages. One of the take-home messages that I think is very clear for senior management is that we need to not simply change our policies, replacing the name deans with heads of schools, but we need to redesign our policies to reflect the kinds of ideas that are being articulated here. The second important thing is I think we need to provide fora for these kinds of experiences that Debbie, you're talking about, to come to the fore. We are not sharing our experiences as much as possible. For example, one of my beefs this year has been we haven't had a teaching learning forum, because that is an opportunity for people to come to a fora and actually give presentations, you know, about what they are doing. And unless you have that opportunity, you can be doing wonderful work and we don't know. I mean, sorts of things that Sheila is talking about, specific pedagogy. Not that we don't know. I think we know. There are people like the giants here, like, you know, Konai, and Francis, who have written so much, and Sheila, who have written so much about this, but the conversation seems to be hidden in little corners and amongst the people who know, and not amongst common people. I mean, I want to see, I want to hear what Lapani has to say about Pacific pedagogy and how is that reflected in how learning and teaching is taking place, and how, for example, Nada, who teaches finance, integrates or explains what Pacific pedagogy means for an accountant or for a person. And unless these things are clear, someone like Eddie does not know what you would require. So this is I've said so many things in one place, but I think what I'm trying to get is here what needs to be done. As I said, and I want to see whether you agree with me or not, is I think we need to relook at our policy. We have a flexible learning policy. We have an open educational resources policy. We have a teaching learning policy. We have IT policies. These policies need to be re-examined given what has happened and how they need to be changed. That's number one. That's number one takeaway, isn't it? Nada?
Yes, I agree. And I think one of the issues that we've identified across the university as a whole, and this is not just learning and teaching, is that a lot of our policies are not reviewed regularly. And so I think that that's one of the big issues here. We need to think, so recalibrating,
Mm,
how we revise and review policies and make sure that they're relevant. Because if the policy was written 10 years ago, oh my goodness, so much has changed. That belongs in the archives, and we need something that's more living and breathing
mm,
and dynamic. So I think that is a big takeaway, just ensuring that all our policies, because the policy can actually hold us hostage, where
mm,
we can't do something because the policy doesn't allow us to do it. So the issue is, how do we ensure that all our policies remain current and contemporary? Thank you.
mm. Yeah. And I think we need to bring back our teaching and learning forum the way it used to be, not just a place where a few people get to come and talk about it, but a place where everyone gets a chance to come and present, no matter how short or how poor, or how good that presentation is. It's one thing to have two or three people showcased as best teachers. It's another thing to give everybody a chance to come and talk about. The more noise you make about something, the more acculturation there is. And I want to hear more about how people are integrating and articulating what Pacific pedagogy means. I mean, I have some ideas about it, but and how does it articulate in physics or chemistry or accounting in different ways, Seola? And I think people will be looking for ideas from someone like yourself to say, all right, this is what I mean by Pacific pedagogy, but what does it mean in the context of teaching accounting, isn't it?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, colleagues. I think if I could backtrack a bit about our role as a university, as 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 teaching and learning, I think a part of it also is the research component. Our role as researchers and as applied researchers. I'd really like to, in reimagining, is that our policies are based on research and that our policies are based on evidence and that our teaching and our learning approach is also based on evidence. When we move to online and face to face, and what is the evidence? What is the science behind this? What is it telling us? How our students who are being taught face to face performing? Do they generally do better than students who are online? Where is the science and where is the evidence to support us in exploring new policies and new approaches? And forgive me if it already exists, but here in Tonga we don't know. So that is a part that I'm concerned about, is all the evaluations that are run at the end of every semester, every courses. Where do all those evaluations go? It probably comes to lectures, but it comes back to our role as researchers and providing the evidence that is needed to inform our practice, and also that practice informs the research. Um, the second part about Pacific pedagogy, and that is a very important question that as Pacific academics and Pacific lecturers and Pacific researchers is a question that we need to be always have our eye on that. What is it? And what does it mean? We know that we need a more relevant pedagogy. That we know. We know something is relevant to our students, the language that we use, the content of what's put up on Moodle, the content on our textbooks. Those are all part of that conversation. In research that we do work in the Solomon Islands and also here in Tonga, and quite some time ago in the Cook Islands, we did some research looking into classroom observations of children. And what we saw in those classrooms perhaps is an early sign of how students behave when they come to USP. That's a big generalization, but this is where they are at this point. And when we observe children and their interaction with teachers, getting them to a point where they are part of a conversation about their learning is a significant part. For most of us, it's about the listening component. You know, in Tonga and in most cultures is, you know, listen, observe, look. You know, so in our classroom observations, we've gained data, results of those studies, and we've supported teachers on how to engage children in talanoa or talk story. And we see the cumulative effect of a talanoa, right? Because talanoa, as we all know, you bring something to the table, I bring something to the table, and it's a process towards a collaborative idea. So research allows us to tap into these understandings so that when we begin to talk about what does Pacific pedagogy look like, what does Tongan pedagogy look like? And what are other things inside a Tongan pedagogy that happens? And it's talanoa, it's whanongo, it's sio, and then the same in Debbie and Tere Moana's work of Tivaiwai, and using the Tivaiwai as an opportunity to understand the context upon which our students work within. We have these frameworks around us that allows us to investigate, not as outsiders looking in, but as insiders. We are people who are in this context. So we have these frameworks with us, and I'm really pleased to see how the Tivaiwai has taken on much further, and congratulations, Debbie, for that. And also the talk story works from Solomon Islands, from Kapini, and looking at talk story. And the Tongans have progressed from Kakala, from Konai's Kakala to the Kakala research framework that we use. So we have the tools. There are emerging tools that we could use to look into what does a Cook Island pedagogy looks like, and what does a Marshallese pedagogy looks like. I think it's from that perspective then we could generate something back into a Pacific regional perspective. And we also have to recognize that the region, our perspective of regionalism has also changed over the years. The old model of regionalism, and I remember this clearly from former director of USP campus in the Cook Islands. He said to me, "Oh, USP model is just an old colonial model." And I thought, oh, yeah, maybe he is right. And so regionalism itself has changed. So what is our role as regional educators in a shifting context? And how willing are we to dig a lot deeper into pulling out something from these 12 different contexts? It's something that we at the Institute are exploring. It's something that as researchers, we're interested in continuing exploring and trying to understand just a little bit more with research. And again, I come back to our role in this universities as researchers to ask the questions, to dig deeper. I think I'll stop there.
No, you don't need to stop there. I think you need to talk more, not just here, because as I see, the problem is not lack of knowledge, it's the dissemination of knowledge. I think people like you and Konai and other people, you're the brain boxes, you know about this stuff. But you know what my problem is, and I want Nadar's view and I want Lapani's view on this one. Lapani, I'll come to you. How much, Lapani, I'll come to you. Lapani, here's the first question for you. How much of this do you see coming out in your lectures, and not just yours, in other lectures? How much of what Nesula was just talking about, the importance of what he was talking about coming out, and this is related, Nadar, to staff development. We hire people, the again, based on very outdated criteria, based on H index, whatever that means, and your ranking in the world, and little. I mean, I dare suggest that we don't consider the ability of people to be able to function and teach in an environment like this, and I think more should be done in that area. So you hold on to the capacity building of academic staff in being able to teach in a complex university like this. But Lapani, come back to you. How much of this is important to you, and do you see in your classes or in your lectures?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, for lectures like face-to-face lectures, you meaning, sir?
I mean, look, what I'll say this again. Seola was talking about some very sophisticated concepts. You heard her, right?
Yeah.
Now, do you see this sort of thing coming out in your classes, in your courses? Not necessarily lectures, but in your courses. How much of this is evident in your courses, whichever course you're taking?
Yes, I can see that even for me, I can see that lecture theaters is always empty, and most students prefer lecture recording. That's from the course that I'm taking right now, and yes,
Can I just chip in there, just building on what Lepani
yes,
said? Sorry, Lepani, just to add on to what you were saying. So, in the lecture, for example, a 300 level accounting course where I'm trying to encourage students, okay, here's a question. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, have a chat to one or two people around you, and then I want to get your feedback in the lecture, and we're going to build on that. And I'm finding that there's not always a lot of willingness for on the part of students to actually engage and put their ideas out there. And so I'm going back to, okay, at what point in these students, in this person's life, did they stop being curious? Did they stop being willing to engage and put their ideas out there? And so where's the disconnect between what I'm finding in my 300 level course and the things that Sil was talking about, in the classroom, maybe at a primary school or at a secondary school? Where's the disconnect? At what point has the student got the message, intended or unintended, that there's only one right answer? And if you don't think you've got that one right answer, don't say anything, because you don't want to be shamed in front of your peers. So I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking as I talk, you know, what to what extent does a USP student identify as a Pacific person? To what extent are they coming into the USP and saying, okay, I'm a graduate of USP, which means I'm a Pacific person with a Pacific identity, I'm a Pacific learner, etc. And to what extent are they saying, now I'm just a university student? So I'm just putting the question out there. How much value do our learners put on their Pacific identity? I'm in no way saying that Pacific pedagogy is not important. That's not my point. My point is, are students engaging with that? Do they see themselves as Pacific learners, as Pacific people contributing to the Pacific? Or do they just see themselves as no different from someone attending another university in another part of the world? I'm wondering about that.
Lapani? Your microphone is muted, Lapani. Leave it on, it's all right.
Yes, thank you so for that. I think students are different, and yeah.
It's a tough question, and somebody in the chat session, I think it was Any Crook, who was also asking along the same lines. And maybe more, if I can, make Nada's question or rephrase Nada's question to you is, in the student union, do you guys have a discussion about teaching and learning?
Yes, sir.
What do you talk about? What do you talk about?
Uh, most times, for example, for this semester, we have already disseminate some questionnaires to students just for their feedback on what they think about the online learning that we are going in right now, and what the difference, what are some challenges they are facing from face to face and when going on to online learning.
What do you do with the data? What do you do with the data? Have you got the data already?
Yes, we have that data.
And what does it say? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
And like we distribute questionnaires, online questionnaires, and it's less than 400 students that they reply to that questionnaires. And from that questionnaires that were distributed, like can say 45% that prefer face-to-face, and the rest is online learning, like both online learning and with the face-to-face learning.
At the same time, I'm reading that message. I think it was Andy was saying that, even though you say that there's a preference for it, in her classes, people don't engage online, they don't participate online,
Yes.
I mean, I'm trying to put the pressure a bit back on the students, isn't it? And this is what Nada was saying, students have to wake up a little bit and think about what they're doing, not just simply show up and try and consume as much as they get and then walk away and reproduce it. It's got to be a two-way process, and I know it raises a whole bunch of issues about culturation and the nature of our students and how shy and how confident they are. In American university, Australian universities, they have to shut students down because they they take over. But there is something to be said about student engagement in the learning and teaching process, and this is why we have you here, because we want you to take this back to your community and to say it's do not necessarily always opt for the easy way out. You want to get the most of the learning opportunity that the environment or the institution presents to you. You need to have a say in it. Oftentimes senior management will listen to students more than they would listen to an academic staff member. But I guess I've answered your question for you. I wanted you to answer the question. What I want to go back to is this academic staff development thing, because I think academic staff across the sector and across the university is so disparate. It takes me back to the point, Shola, you were talking about, is like the level of sophistication that you articulated. Is it spread evenly, and how do we spread that evenly in an institution like this?
I think it comes back to our thinking about I think it comes back to my point about our view of regionalism and our view of ourselves as regional civil servants. What is our role? And from there is to rethink about our role in this space, and how do we articulate this new regional configuration? And when I'm saying a new regional configuration, I'm coming back to Epeli's ocean philosophy and the current narrative around the Blue Pacific continent. So if we begin from a perspective that the region is expansive, is significantly huge, and it's diverse, then we don't need to be fighting or need to be in competition to a limited resource. So if we view it as a more hospitable and more open place, that through a more relational approach to one another, that we can come through a more collaborative understanding of how do we go forward. I think some of the way that we've been approaching our profession, our job as researchers in this region has been coming from a perspective that there isn't enough for everyone. So I must try to protect what I have because there isn't enough. But if we come back to viewing it as Oceania, more than the 12, our diaspora, welcoming of those who come to the region recently, those of us, the very soil we walk on, of our ancestors. So it comes back to our perspective, Som and my colleagues, about how do we view ourselves as regional civil servants, our perspective. And then from there, we may be better able to spread. I think when we think about resourcing and that there are assumptions that we have behind it, and usually our assumption is that there is not enough for everybody, so we have to compete. And once we are on that track, then spreading it will never spread enough. But if we shift to Epeli's oceanic theory and we shift to the Blue Pacific continent, that there is enough. There is more than enough for all of us. We can be more relational in our learning. We can be more open to being honest about each other, and we can be open to being vulnerable, that we can collectively join the dots and move our region together without leaving anyone behind. And that's my view of the perspective of how we go. And I hope I'm making sense. I come from a different way of operating.
Look, you're making a lot of sense to me. If I can use the metaphor, like, I mean, you are the priest, like you go to a church, the priest will tell you the wise things, the generic things, be nice to one another. But I'm going to put the hard question to Eddie. Eddie, you've been to the church, you heard the good things in life, right? What are the right things to do? Now, you're the guy who's got to put this in practice. What would you do and want from the point of view of infrastructure and resources to support what Shola is talking about? How are you going to make that happen?
See, from what I've heard from everybody, and I think it's a good thing, I've heard a little bit about policy. That's very true. Policy is a bit too stringent at the moment because we're trying to compress being open and promoting online learning and stuff like that. But at the same time too, in terms of infrastructure, don't get me wrong, the infrastructure exists already in place. It's just tapping into the resources on that infrastructure that's the challenge. And sometimes it comes down to something that we need to do at a council level, where we get the governments to make education a bit more open in terms of regulatory domains and stuff like that. But outside of all of that, there's small positional things that we need to do. But technology exists, and I think Lepani hit it on the nail there, where he's saying 55% of students are liking the online streaming purpose, simply because, and if we look at the landscape at the moment, Dr. Selo, I think Dr. Debbie mentioned something about people having to travel for 4 hours to come for a course. The Outreach Common targets that, where you don't have to invest too much, but you can set up something simple enough at a remote location, and then bang, the people can just go to that location. Nava also touched on that. But the outreach common is not a concept that was meant for Fiji. It was meant for the entire Pacific. And we're actually planning that for locations like Solomon Islands. We're looking into possibilities for Kiribati. We're looking into possibilities for Vanuatu. Setting up a campus is a bit too expensive because you need heavy resources around that. But an outreach common, which is low investment, just requires an internet connectivity. And we've also made pathways into ensuring that rather than buying, and I'm just talking a little bit technical here, the cost of a router, for example, to set up a campus would be, say, about $40,000. Whereas you can buy something that can still maintain that security and still provide that connectivity for maybe $7,000. So this is the sort of things that we're starting to think about here. How can we make the technology accessible so that setting up these outreaches are not so expensive that, top level management just turn away and say, oh, we can't afford that. It's an ongoing challenge. And there has to be a balance between us being able to provide what needs to go out there because we know people need it desperately and they don't have to pay so much in traveling expenses, um, against being able to deliver something that's secured and that's not compromised for the institution. And I think that's I'm really enjoying the conversation today because it's allowing me to be able to understand the limitations where some of our policies are very restrictive. And as Natha quite rightfully put it, it needs a massive overhaul. Now, if I can just touch on Dr. Debbie's comments about YouTube and being able to access that just a little bit. When we first wrote out the policy because the council mandated that we needed to control bandwidth in the region, we purposely left a clause in there where the director had the the ability to open up YouTube as we saw fit. And that is why perhaps a lot of people will notice this in campuses that we have fiber connectivity, YouTube's available on the wireless. So we were able to make that assertion without having to affect it. Now, to be honest, I'm hoping that by 2021, if I can convince him, I'd like to open it up completely and not be so restrictive. But that all comes down to us channeling the data upstream, and forums like this is where we can come up with possible pathways for 2021 and make it easier for students rather than making it so difficult. That's the way.
Yeah, you raise a whole bunch of points there. I'll come to you in a minute, Nadar. But the point I think Eddie you mentioned is that outreach commons, as I was saying, it's a resource, isn't it? It's not just about building, placing computers in a room and providing network connectivity. One needs to be clear about what is going to happen there from a pedagogical point of view, from a teaching point of view. And this is why we need to ask the deans, the associate heads, the teachers, what are they going to do? Otherwise, you're going to build as many places like this and people might come there, people might not come there. Who is going to supervise that? In many ways, these are the tentacles of a campus. So an outreach commons, you call it a campus or you call it a commons or you call it a center. It's the same thing, mate. It's a place where people can go, right? That's what it is. So the management of it should be in the hands of the local campus directors. I mean, that's not my role here, but I'm just going out on a limb to suggest that. But what I think is important is, and you're right, and this is why we dragged you in here, that people who are responsible for the orchestration of technology need to know what are the challenges that the students are facing, what are the challenges that the teachers are facing, and what do they want to do in those places. It's like the old thing, bringing people into a classroom doesn't mean that they're going to learn. We are in the business of designing learning experiences for students, productive learning experiences. And everything that Nisula is saying is at the heart of the matter. It's the sermon that we need. The question is, how do you articulate the sermon? And I wanted to go back to Nada about my point about capacity building of academic staff. How many academic staff are in tune with that kind of thinking, Nada?
I don't know. You'll have to ask them. But in partly answering your question, I just made two notes to myself. One is around professional development, and some of the discussion in the chat forum has been around PD. So that would be professional development, of course, for academic staff. And I'd like to link in there the idea of micro credentials. And I must admit that's a very new term to me. I've only just come across it in the last 2 or 3 months. So I'll admit that, it's fairly new. But I think these two can be brought in together, because part of the professional development at USP for academics is the PGCTT, which takes people about 3 semesters, and I think is very valuable, very useful. I say that as an alumni of the program. But also the idea that just because you've got the PGCTT doesn't mean you know everything, because the world is changing every day. So in order to handle that, we need ongoing professional development. And that's something we have done within the faculty. And we've had, I think, quite a good response, because it's certainly brought a lot of issues to the table. We've involved CFL with that. But I think taking that forward, around the area of micro credentials, where, either something that's contemporary and we need to roll that out to our staff, or issues that we identify where things are not working well. For example, inappropriate assessment. Obviously we need to have that conversation, and it needs to be done in a safe space, but also in a way that brings about improvement. So just a random thought. And I know that this could be open to gaming of the system, but maybe as part of our evaluation of staff performance, every year or every 3 years, every contract, academic staff are required to complete a certain number of hours of professional development, evidenced through micro credentials. There's a thought. That could be a way of progressing this conversation.
That is a wonderful thought, and I totally want to endorse that, and I hope that my colleagues are listening, because just like any medical professional, or any legal professional, you have to keep up your credentialing, isn't it? Your professional credentialing is dependent on that, and in academia, I mean, well, I'm not saying we don't have it. We do it all the time by attending conferences, by attending webinars. All of these things are important, and I think sometimes people don't know how to develop that portfolio, articulate that, and I think that too needs to be part of the CPD, and the officers of the DVC and the PVCs can and take on those roles. Sometimes I feel like, while I'm being very hard on the teaching academic for being very myopic and concentrated on their research and teaching, a lot of the time they don't know how else to actually articulate and expand their professionalism and engage in, things like micro-credentialing and sorts of things that you're talking about, because this somebody said in the chat forum, pedagogy is changing all the time, and that kind of acculturation and education is necessary. So it goes back to the question of what is senior management doing about it? Are they thinking about it, and what is happening at the cold face? And Debbie, you've been very quiet for a little while, so I wanted to come back to you.
I'm processing. There's so much to think about. I think one of the things that I've learned along the way when I've tried to be creative with the way that I offer courses online, like for example, doing a flipped classroom, is the extraordinary amount of time it takes me compared to doing a traditional kind of lecture tutorial kind of approach. So I think one of the things we need to be really cognizant of is the workload of academics. Yes, we need professional development. I'm pretty sure I probably only know about 20% of all Moodle's capabilities, probably, the things that I'm familiar with, you go back to time and time again. But we could possibly, utilize some of those things in creative ways whereby we automate some of the marking for certain things, so that academics are freed up to be able to use that time to then think creatively around the pedagogies they possibly use. I think we definitely overassess. My experience from 2 previous universities has been that the policy is maximum of 2 assessments per course you take. I'm absolutely flabbergasted at the number of assessments expected of students at USP and the workload that generates for academics. So I think, we can't have our cake and eat it too. We can't be expecting academics to, be off researching, creating amazing, innovative, creative, recalibrated courses without being able to invest the time and money into them and their skills, and to be thinking about what's the best pedagogies for their students. I also think we need to re-look at the assessment policy really closely and think, let's be way more creative in the way that we assess for our students, and for the workload of staff. So maybe that's what I'll leave it there.
Ala keeps muting me all the time, so I have to unmute myself. I'm talking too much. I've got a couple of questions. I know we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm sure people will want to go and get some lunch, at least in Fiji. There's a couple of questions. And it might be a good idea to just sort of think of the future a little bit. We have raised so many issues, and I know we're not naive. There are challenges as well. So this is the way the world is. But if we were to take about a minute or so and articulate what is the next generation of learning and teaching model that you think will happen, or you'd like to see happen, the next generation. And I would like to begin with the student, Lapani. What do you think as a student you like to see the next model of learning and teaching? Are you the kind of guy that Eddie was talking about, stay at home and study from home? Or what does the model look like for you and your colleagues? Unmute yourself.
Since we start to engage on online learning, I think the next generation of business models will be in a much more advanced workforce, mostly dealing with technology. There may be less human effort or manual work. And I also believe that the method of teaching that we are engaged in right now is good, like the online learning and also face-to-face. Students, the only thing is students need to know their responsibility in engage in this method of learning, whether is it face-to-face or online. And also we suggest that the university should allow both and face-to-face and online learning in every courses if it's possible, and this will allow students to make their choice. And I can say that the generation that we are in right now, uh, it's different from the past generation, and the generation, we can say that this is the 4G generation, and it's most of them prefer technology. Like we can see, for example, students are always with their phone, and students are always engaged in internet and such kind of thing. And I believe that the next generation will be more focused than on online. And if because students are different, and we are brought up differently, and if this can be allowed both face to face and for online learning for the next generation.
You can go and tell your students, Lapani, I hope you do that they can spend 24 hours texting messages to one another and chatting with one another, but when they're asked to post a conversation in a class, like Nada was saying, or engage in the discussion forum, they're not very keen to do that. Isn't that right? So I'm not excited by this Z generation or this thing that people are tech savvy. They're selectively tech savvy. They'd like to do things that they want to do, but not other things, isn't it? That they're required to do.
Yes. Yeah, it's like students have the responsibility as well, as Dr. Rick has already mentioned, that yes, um, students are, they like for now most of them are spending on they are not the time management, like for them to manage their time, they are doing the wrong choice and the wrong option. Like most of them are just engaging in like Facebook and other thing rather than go on to Moodle and going to post their comments on Moodle like that. And that's some of the things that the student association can do from this thing that we can we raise awareness and something like that for students to be alert on what to be done and to improve in doing their
Mhm.
courses in
Yeah,
online
yeah,
learning.
yeah.
I
No,
think
no,
some of that,
yeah, yeah. Go ahead,
sorry,
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I think some of that comes back to us as academics and course coordinators in trying to be more interesting in the way that we ask our students to engage, rather than just 46 discussion forums in a course, for example, each of them with 1 mark. That's just not an interesting pedagogy. And I would not be interested in responding 46 times for 1 mark. So I'm really wondering why we would expect our students to do that. So I think it's up to us to use some really interesting apps, or, sexy it up a bit, like what we might do in our course around engaging with the kinds of things that our students might be interested in, rather than 46 discussion forums. I don't think we can blame the students totally on that one.
Ab- 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 Absolutely, I agree with that, because and this takes, and I can see another is keen on jumping in there, because I have a point about that too, and it's about, just create a discussion forum. It's like the center thing that I was talking about, Edwin. Making a space and telling go there and work is not going to help. You've got to make sure there's got to be a reason why students would want to go there, whether it's a discussion forum or it's a Creative Commons area. Nada, my friend?
Sorry, Sam. No, I didn't have any specific intervention, but I'll just reiterate something that I mentioned on the chat, which is potentially, reimagining and recalibrating. So maybe from day one, when a student enters a USP campus, one of the strong messages that we need to be articulating and reiterating throughout the program is pacificness, to or so what is our Pacific identity, what are our Pacific values, and how is that going to translate into our learning and teaching Pacific pedagogies? Because I don't think we're doing enough of that at the moment. And when I say we, I mean all of us. Yeah, as an institution, I don't think we're doing enough. So I just flagged that next year, with the generic courses being reviewed, maybe we want to rethink I think it's UU 204, Pacific Worlds, and not criticizing the content in any way, but just saying, how do we make that more relevant, more contemporary? Do we need it? Does that need to be done in the first semester?
Hmm.
Because we really want to get the value and the benefit of that throughout the university experience. So, I've made my comment on in the chat forum, but
Hmm.
in terms of reimagining, recalibrating, let's put more emphasis on that, because I think we all agree it is important, but it's not getting enough focus at the moment, and including regionalism.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, I have one last question that I want to start with Eddie's response, or give an opportunity to Eddie start responding to that. Is USP doing enough to address the challenges that we are talking about? And what more can it do, Eddie?
Kind of putting me there on the spot. So,
You're damn right I am. You're damn right I am.
I think USP is doing enough in sense of what they can afford or what they can provide in terms of resourcing. Um, I feel that, and I think Dr. Seoul is doing a little bit of this on the side. I think that we need to be reaching out to our schools a bit more often. Whilst I understand that it's at the moment it's more in terms of trying to get them to become students of the future. I think on the preparatory side of things, where we prepare them for university life, is something that we should look at. But in terms of resourcing, given the current climate that we have around the Pacific, I think enough is being done for the time being. But there's much more work that can be done in terms of working with our academics and trying to channel some of the good ideas that's coming out of this particular discussion here today. And I think it goes without saying that enough is never enough in some instances. You know, there's always going to be, you know, that one extra thing that we could have done, or that one extra thing that should be done. But I think we need to adopt a lot of the ways that students are changing now. Like, for example, one of the most common things that we're facing at the moment is, I believe, the next generation coming up, they're so used to smartphones and tablets. Are we doing enough on thinking along the lines of, okay, do we adopt our teaching and learning so that it's more conducive for these students to use tablets and smartphones in such a way where they actually take the interest to actually going into, you know, the apps that we provide? Are we developing enough in that space? If students are always on Facebook, then that's where we need to be capturing their attention more in terms of our classes. Should we be thinking about how we make convert some of our courses and have them available via Facebook? I don't know what's the story behind that, because a lot of people seem to be doing that as well. It's about trying to capture the fact that our generation that's coming up is going to be more tech savvy. They're going to want to be doing things online more often. And how do we bridge that gap in terms of teaching and learning as well as technology to make that
Eh,
happen? That's the way I see it.
Here's my question, Eddie. You ask me more questions than give me answers. What are you going to do? What are you going to do as a senior manager in I.T.S, given what happened today?
Sorry, I think Allah unmuted me before I could respond. So the way I see it is, number one is we need to open stuff up in the sense we need to make more accessibility to online services instead of being more restrictive.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes when I get requests to say, hey, can you open this up? I don't always want to be the bad cop. Sometimes I'd like to be the one that says, yes, let's go ahead and do that. There's a lot of consideration. But that consideration comes at the same time with the fact that it can be done. We just need to figure out a way of doing that.
Yeah.
And sitting down with the right people, with the right academics, with the right group of people, and trying to figure out a solution rather than saying no, 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 no. You know, you don't want to sound like a parent that's always saying no, don't do this, don't do this, because people are eventually just going to go and do it. They're going to do the exact opposite. But at the same time too, I now understand more than anything is we need to change our mindset as well from a technology standpoint, or from basically the people within IT services, and play our part to also ensure that the services we provide are easier and more accessible to our students and academics that deliver the courses that we offer. We can't have the mindset of not adopting or adapting to, you know, the new paradigms of teaching and learning, and which is why I think more conversation needs to be had on this particular aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, good man. And I was very intentional in dragging you in this because you're the next generation of IT leadership at this place, right? You need to hear this conversation because you need to have, and I'm glad to hear that that yes mentality, yes we can, rather than no we can't mentality, even though it might be dangerous. I understand enough IT, so I hope you take this message back and capitalize on the goodwill that is around. But you're not the only person. I'm going to leave the same question to Sola, let's say, for example. What's your take on this, Sola?
Thank you, Sam. I have a 7-year-old son, and most 7-year-old sons these days just want the phone and go like this on it. But before he's allowed to do that, he needs to decide what hymn are we going to sing in our morning prayers. And he needs to clean up his bed. He needs to make his bed. He needs to make breakfast. And he needs to go and feed the pigs, help his father feed the pigs. Mm-hmm. When COVID-19 happened, we went into lockdown, as most did. And when cyclones strike, the internet goes off. What then do you do? There are soft skills that we need to teach our children and to teach our young adults. Because they are young adults when they come to us. They come as 19-year-olds, 21-year-olds. And as teachers, we have a responsibility to mentor them. And we have a responsibility to guide, to offer guidance in this life that we have. So when we talk about our values as specific people, where are they going to learn those values of respect, of humility, Where are they going to learn the values of looking after their environment in a world that we live in, that climate change is a reality? They'll learn it from us. They'll learn it from us. We are the teachers, we are the role models. How can Eddie make a platform that allows me to be in that kind of relationship with the likes of Lebani? That there is a relationship between our lecturers and our students, that they are not just a number to pass on to the next one. Can we go beyond the technology and perhaps back to basics of being a teacher? Is that we are role models to our students. We offer more than just grading their marks. So the future of USP depends again on us and our articulation of our role as educators and as people of this region. We want our region to thrive. We want our region to be sustainable. How do we teach Lebanon that there is a relationship between us, that you protect our waters for the safety of my 7-year-old Lebanon, that you're going to learn so that you could serve your community and you could bring back to our islands so that we can live in our islands, that we don't have to migrate because the water is rising. So those are issues of our day. Those are our challenges. And as USP academics and lecturers and researchers, it comes back to our own values. And why did we get into this in the first place? Why did we want become teachers in the first place? So this is an opportunity also for me to reflect back on how we relate to our students.
Yeah.
What is that relationship and how does that relationship look? And how do we want that relationship to go into the future? Because we're preparing them for a world that is far more challenging than the world that we grew up in. My son needs to know how to feed the pigs and grow cassava and still know how to do an online game that he wants. There are multiple skills that they need to know to survive in going into the future. And I hope, we can only hope, we are capable of providing that opportunity for students when they come to USP. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. I'll come back to the question, the same question that I put to that Edwin and Seoul have responded to. Is USP doing enough?
One of the things I think that we are missing out on at the moment is the relational thing that Seola is talking about. We are, our students in the region often get no responses when they either email or send a message within Moodle from their course coordinators. And so nothing makes you feel like nothing when there is no more so than when there is no response. So there's no relationship that you can come onto. So perhaps something, rather than thinking of the problems, I'm trying to think about the problem solving. And I think one of the things that possibly could be done is that, at one slot during a week, I know that's difficult for time-wise across the region sometimes, but that you can be sitting here, like I could be sitting here on Zoom and working, but if any of my students between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock want to come on and talk to my face, I will be here once a week. I don't know, is that way to keep the relational aspect of our teaching alive? Because at the moment it feels a bit like my students are really just don't have a connect with many of their course coordinators unless it's their tutor that's on the ground here. So yeah, let's think outside the square about, keeping in mind the human aspect of all of this, the students and the lecturers and the academics.
Nada, a response to that, or response to my question? Are we doing enough?
No. It's a good question, and I think somebody answered this earlier and said, there's always more that can be done. So I think I would hope that each one of us does the best we can with the resources that we have and the knowledge that we have.
Mm,
I think that's something that we can aspire to.
mm.
And there's been talk in the chat forum about having an abundance mentality. I agree with that. It does come back at the end of the day to resources, to academics. Academics can only do so much within the time they have. And I believe a lot of academics have very good intentions, noble intentions. At the end of the day, they're juggling a lot of things as well. So I think we need to be kind to each other. We need to support each other. And yeah, look, we need to have a positive attitude towards this. And I think we need to be the champions. So, all this very good discussion that we've had today, we need to find a mechanism to channel this back, to senior management, and to put our hands up and say, yes, we are prepared to do the work. We're prepared to champion this cause. Um, because it does come back to us at the end of the day. We need to champion the cause.
Wonderful. Well said, Nada. I'm going to leave the last word to you, Nepani. Are we doing enough? What is the message you're going to take to your students? Unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir. I believe and I can say that the university is doing enough. As I already mentioned that we also have our responsibilities as well as the course coordinators and the teachers and lecturers, tutors, and something that I can pass on to students is that we all have responsibilities, like we need to work together, and we need to send the work to our course coordinators and the mode that is being provided to us. And there's another thing that really, like for students, I just want to comment on the the feedback or the on the chat forum or the discussion for students. Like students, they work on their mark sheet. So if there's a group discussion with the course coordinators, they need the feedback from students, and the students will just go on to the mark sheet. And this is something that why students are not answering or giving in their feedback to the online learning or on Moodle, that group chat. And also if they are given 1 mark and they feel that it's better for them just to do well and do better in their um, assignment, and that whole assignment, rather than just wasting their time on sending their feedback to their course coordinators with no marks given, but they will just follow what have been put out by the course coordinators. This is something that the students go for, like why they are not, most of the time, they are not response to chat forum in their online learning. And also sometimes we think that the course coordinators need to be flexible, and in terms of most students, when they come to their course coordinators, or even like they face different have different issues in every day. Like whenever they come, they can see because we all know that our course coordinators are there with a busy schedule, and sometimes when we come and their facial expression, this is something that students are facing right now. And also some of these issues that students are opted to go on to online learning rather than face-to-face learning, just because of the facial expression from course coordinators. I'm saying this, that most students are going on for online learning. We can say that for me, I believe that one of the I'm talking from experience, one of the unit that I've just um, I took last 2 years, and I think that most students that we prefer go on to online just because on that the relationship between the course coordinators and the students, and we feel that we better go for online learning, and we better go for we better listen to our lecture tutorial or lecture theater, lecture recording. Yeah, I'm sorry, lecture recording, rather than just go on to our course coordinator and face that those kind of facial expression. These are some of the relationship between the tutors or the course coordinators and the students that the students are facing right now. Yes, that's all from.
Thank you, Lapani. I don't think that's never going to be all from any
Yes,
one of
yeah,
us.
not
There's so
all.
much. There's
Yeah,
so much more to talk about. But look,
yeah,
the idea was to start a conversation because we were frustrated that nobody was talking about these germane issues, and yet there's so much expertise in amongst us that there's not much more we need. It's a question of sharing what we need so that we can map out pathways for the future. What we are going to do with the content of this webinar is summarize it and make it available to committees and to fora where something can be done about it. I mean, don't I'll be the last one to say that we had a great chat and you walk away and then what? Nothing happens. What I'm going to do here, and with help of Allah and her team, is to put out a report that can go to SMT, that can go to the Senate, where we can continue the conversation and do something about it. Isn't it? Otherwise, it's just all a lot of talk and no action is some. But look, it's way past our lunchtime, and for you, Debbie, probably end of the day. So I must thank you all for giving you the time. And now that this is marking time, I know busy time, so I'm delighted that you were able to take time off and be with us. Um, and Seola and Eddie. So thank you, and thank you, Ala, for putting this together, because there's a lot of work that went on behind the scenes to make this work well. But it did go well. My apologies, Lapani, for missing you out, because I think it was Ala's fault. She gave me a sheet that didn't have your name on it. Uh, I'm sure she'll take that off the recording, Eddie. But now go level, Ralph. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to all the panelists. It's really been an invigorating discussion. Thank you, PVC, as moderator. It's really been interesting. I was just torn between writing what I wanted to my questions, my comments, as opposed to monitoring things behind the scenes. Thank you to the participants. Thank you for your participation today. What we will be doing from now is make the recording available, and we'll post it in the various public forums so that you are able to revisit, reflect, and continue the talanoa. So to all the panelists, thank you so much. Dr. Debbie from the Cook Islands, Dr. Seula, thank you so much. Dr. Rika, Lepani, I think, has left us. Thank you so much, Vinaka. And Eddie, thank you. And also to Katerina, I think she stepped out, or maybe she had to go to, okay, she's in the corner, hiding in the corner, Katerina. Katerina, it was a breeze for you. You didn't really have to do any moderating of questions. So, but, wonderful conversations, wonderful deliberations, and like what PVC said, we are not going to stop here. We have to do something about what has been discussed there. We need to take it to the SMT level, so that, particularly now going into the restructure, this is something that can further inform the restructure, whatever plans that the university has in terms of building this place. So thank you so much. I can't thank you all enough, especially Dr. Seal and Dr. Debbie. When the restrictions are lifted, we hope that we can, when you come to Fiji next, we can sit down and have a kappa, or just a talanoa. Yeah. So thank you so much. If there's anything else, I think we'll skip the photo op because we've taken screen captures and we've run out of time. And I guess this is it now. We'll have further discussions if there's anything else post webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. And yeah, a happy Merry Christmas and a happy 2021. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, colleagues.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.